Richard Hale had $47 million in his accounts, a tech empire under his command, and absolutely no idea how to stop his autistic son from screaming at 30,000 feet. The first-class passengers were already filming, already judging, as 9-year-old Ethan's meltdown shattered the premium cabin's cultivated calm. 3 rows back in economy, 12-year-old Malik Johnson watched it all unfold. The millionaire's humiliation, the boy's terror, the crowd's cruel fascination, and recognized something everyone else had missed. With nothing but a broken toy car and hard-won wisdom from caring for his own autistic cousin, Malik stood up to do what all that money and expertise couldn't. See Ethan not as a problem to solve, but as a kid who just needed someone to meet him where he was. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. The morning sun glinted off the windows of Gate B7 at LaGuardia Airport as Richard Hale adjusted his Italian silk tie for the 3rd time in as many minutes. His fingers, adorned with a platinum wedding band he still couldn't bring himself to remove, moved with practiced precision. Everything about Richard screamed success, from his tailored charcoal suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent to the way he carried himself through the crowded terminal with an air of untouchable authority. But today, that carefully constructed facade showed cracks around the edges. "Ethan, stay close," Richard commanded, his voice carrying that particular tone of forced patience that came from years of boardroom negotiations rather than parental warmth. His 9-year-old son walked beside him, hands pressed firmly against his ears, eyes darting nervously at the chaos of the busy airport. Ethan Hale was a beautiful child with his father's sharp features softened by youth, his sandy hair perfectly combed despite his constant fidgeting. He wore designer clothes that looked uncomfortable on his small frame, as if the fabric itself was too heavy for his sensitive skin. Every few steps, he would pause to rock slightly on his heels, a self-soothing motion that Richard tried desperately to ignore. "First class, as always, Mr. Hale." The gate agent's smile was practiced, professional, recognizing one of their frequent premium passengers. "Of course," Richard replied curtly, handing over their boarding passes while keeping one hand on Ethan's shoulder. The boy flinched at the touch but didn't pull away. As they made their way down the jet bridge, Richard could already hear the whispers starting behind them. He'd grown accustomed to it over the years. Some recognized him from the business journals, the tech mogul who'd built an empire from nothing. Others simply saw the expensive suit and assumed. But lately, the whispers had taken on a different tone, especially when people noticed Ethan. "That's Richard Hale," a woman murmured to her husband. "You know, the one whose wife died last year. Cancer, I heard." "Poor kid," the husband replied, watching Ethan cover his ears more firmly as a baby started crying nearby. "Must be hard, raising a special needs child alone with all that money." Richard's jaw tightened. He heard every word, felt every glance like a tiny dagger. Money. As if money could fix everything. As if the $40,000 a month therapy programs and private tutors and specialist consultations had made any difference when Ethan still couldn't look him in the eye for more than a second. They settled into their first-class seats, 2A and 2B, Richard immediately pulling out his phone to check emails while Ethan pressed himself against the window, tracing patterns on the glass with his finger. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to begin boarding our economy class passengers," the announcement echoed through the cabin. Meanwhile, back in the terminal, 12-year-old Malik Johnson stood in the economy boarding line, his stomach doing nervous flips. He'd never been on a plane before, never been anywhere really, except between his apartment in the Bronx and school. His backpack, a faded blue thing with a broken zipper held together with safety pins, contained everything he owned that mattered. A change of clothes, a notebook filled with drawings, and a small collection of toy cars he'd had since he was 5. "Next," the gate agent called out, and Malik stepped forward, his boarding pass trembling slightly in his hand. "First time flying, sweetie?" the agent asked kindly, noticing his nervousness. Malik nodded, not trusting his voice. He was trying to be brave, trying to be the man his mama said he needed to be now. But being brave was hard when everything was so loud and unfamiliar, when he was flying alone to an aunt he'd only met twice in his life because Mama was too sick to take care of him anymore. His clothes were clean. Mama had made sure of that before she went into the hospital. She'd washed his best jeans twice and ironed his polo shirt until it was crisp, even though it had a small stain on the collar that wouldn't come out. "You represent our family," she'd said, her voice weak but proud. "You hold your head high, Malik. You're just as good as anybody else on that plane." Walking down the narrow aisle of economy class, Malik tried not to bump anyone with his backpack. His seat was 27C, all the way in the back, next to the bathrooms. The smell of industrial cleaning products mixed with something else, something stale and recycled, made his stomach turn even more. "Excuse me, sorry," he mumbled, squeezing past a large man who grumbled about kids these days having no respect. Malik finally found his seat and tried to make himself as small as possible, tucking his backpack under the seat in front of him. Back in first class, Richard was growing increasingly tense. Ethan had started his routine, the one that always preceded a difficult flight. He was tapping the armrest in a specific pattern, 7 times fast, 3 times slow, then repeat. His breathing was getting quicker, and Richard knew what came next. "Ethan, please," Richard said quietly, placing his hand over his son's to stop the tapping. "Not today. We talked about this." Ethan yanked his hand away as if burned, his eyes wide with something between fear and frustration. He couldn't explain to his father that the tapping helped, that it made the world feel less sharp, less overwhelming. The engines were starting up now, a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through Ethan's entire body. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a minor seating issue in economy class due to a mechanical problem with one of the rear rows. We'll be reseating a few passengers. Thank you for your patience." Malik looked up as a flight attendant approached him. "Honey, we need to move you to a different seat. There's an issue with this row. Come with me." Confused but obedient, Malik grabbed his backpack and followed the attendant forward, past the curtain that separated economy from premium economy. Then, surprisingly, even further forward. "You're lucky," the attendant smiled. "We're putting you in our last available seat in premium economy. Right here, 7C. Malik couldn't believe it. The seat was bigger, cleaner, and most importantly, much quieter than the back of the plane. He was only a few rows behind the first-class cabin now, close enough to see through the gap in the curtain when flight attendants passed through. The safety demonstration began, and that's when everything started to unravel. The volume was loud, deliberately, so to ensure everyone could hear, but for Ethan, it might as well have been someone screaming directly into his ears. He slammed his palms against his ears, rocking faster in his seat. In the event of a water landing, your seat cushion could be used as a flotation device. Ethan let out a small whimper, the sound barely audible over the announcement, but Richard heard it. He always heard it, that first warning sign before the storm. "It's okay," Richard said stiffly, reaching into his bag for the noise-canceling headphones he'd bought specifically for flights. "Here, put these on." But when he tried to place them on Ethan's head, the boy thrashed away, his hand accidentally hitting Richard's face in his panic. The headphones clattered to the floor. "For the love of," Richard muttered under his breath, then caught himself. "Stay calm. Stay in control." That's what the therapists said. But the therapists weren't here, were they? They weren't the ones dealing with the stares from the flight attendant, the elderly couple across the aisle already shaking their heads in disapproval. From his seat in premium economy, Malik could see the commotion through the gap in the curtain. He recognized something in the boy's movements, the way he rocked, the way his hands flapped when the announcement got even louder talking about oxygen masks. It was exactly like his cousin Marcus back home. Marcus was autistic too, and Malik had spent countless afternoons learning how to help when Marcus got overwhelmed. His aunt had taught him the signs, the tricks the patients needed. "Here we go," Malik heard someone mutter from first class. Can't even control his own kid. The plane began to taxi toward the runway, and Ethan's distress escalated. He was crying now, not loudly yet, but the tears were streaming down his face as he pressed his palms so hard against his ears that his knuckles were white. "Ethan, stop," Richard said, his voice taking on that edge of authority he used in business meetings. "You need to calm down. People are watching. It was the wrong thing to say. Ethan's crying turned into a wail, high-pitched and desperate. "Sir, would you like us to get him something? Water? Maybe some crackers?" A flight attendant appeared, her smile sympathetic but strained. "No, we're fine," Richard said through gritted teeth, though they were clearly not fine. His face was flushed with embarrassment, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool cabin temperature. Malik gripped his armrest, torn between his natural shyness and the overwhelming urge to help. His mama always said he had a gift with Marcus, a way of understanding without words. But this was different. That was a rich man up there, probably important, probably wouldn't want some poor kid from the Bronx interfering with his business. The engines roared to life as the plane positioned for takeoff. Ethan's whole body went rigid, and then he screamed. It wasn't just a cry anymore. It was pure terror, the sound of a child whose nervous system was completely overwhelmed. Richard's carefully maintained control finally cracked. "Ethan, please." His voice was desperate now, all pretense of authority gone. "Please, just stop." But Ethan couldn't stop. The engines were too loud, the lights too bright, his father's distress adding another layer of sensory overload that made everything worse. He began hitting himself, his small fists connecting with his thighs in a rhythm that seemed to provide some kind of relief from the internal chaos. "Oh my God," a woman whispered loudly enough for half the cabin to hear. "This is going to be a long flight." The plane lifted off the ground, and Ethan's screams reached a crescendo that seemed to pierce through the entire aircraft. The seatbelt sign remained illuminated as the plane climbed steadily through the clouds. But inside the first-class cabin, chaos reigned. Ethan's meltdown had evolved from distress cries into something primal and desperate. His legs kicked against the seat in front of him with surprising force, each impact making the businessman seated there turn around with increasing irritation. "This is unacceptable." The businessman, a heavy-set man with an expensive watch that caught the cabin lights, finally exploded. "I paid $4,000 for this seat." Richard's hands shook as he tried to restrain Ethan's legs, but his son's body had become rigid with panic, impossible to control without causing harm. "I'm sorry, I'm trying to." "Try harder," the man snapped, his face red with indignation. Ethan's response to the raised voices was immediate and devastating. He began hitting his own face with open palms, the sound sharp and shocking in the confined space. Several passengers gasped, and a woman across the aisle covered her mouth in horror. "Stop him," she cried out. "He's hurting himself." Richard grabbed Ethan's wrists, but this only made his son thrash more violently, his screams now interspersed with words, the same phrase repeated over and over, "Too loud, too loud, too loud." From his seat in premium economy, Malik could see everything through the gap in the curtain. His heart raced as he watched the scene unfold, remembering so clearly the day Marcus had done the exact same thing at the grocery store. Everyone had stared, had judged, had made it worse with their anger and frustration. But Malik had learned that day that meeting force with force only escalated things. Can't that man control his child? The woman's comment carried clearly through the cabin, each word dripping with disdain. Richard's jaw clenched so tight Malik could see the muscles jumping even for where he sat. The millionaire's face had gone from red to almost purple, his humiliation complete as his son continued to spiral further out of control. "Ethan, stop it," Richard commanded, his voice booming with authority that probably worked in boardrooms but was catastrophic here. "Sit down. Be quiet. You're making a scene," Malik whispered under his breath, the words coming unbidden from memories of his aunt's gentle teachings. "He just needs someone to meet him where he is, not where you want him to be." The flight attendants converged on the scene, their professional composure cracking under the unprecedented situation. The senior attendant, a woman named Patricia according to her name tag, knelt beside Richard's seat. "Sir, we have some medication in our emergency kit that might help calm him down," she suggested, having to raise her voice over Ethan's continued screams. "No," Richard snapped, then caught himself. "No medications. He has reactions. Then perhaps we should consider restraints? For his safety." Another attendant suggested, holding what looked like soft fabric ties used in extreme situations. The word restraints seemed to break something in Richard. His son, his brilliant, complicated, beautiful son, being tied down like some kind of... He couldn't even finish the thought. Absolutely not, Richard said, his voice deadly quiet now, which was somehow worse than the yelling. The businessman from the seat in front had turned fully around now, his face twisted with disgust. This is unbearable. I don't care what's wrong with him. Get him off this flight. We haven't been in the air 20 minutes. Turn the plane around. Murmurs of agreement rippled through first class. Even some of the more sympathetic passengers were beginning to shift uncomfortably, wondering if perhaps the man had a point. He's just a child, the younger woman said softly, but she was immediately shot down by others. A child who's ruining everyone's flight. We all have places to be, important meetings. More important than a little boy's well-being? The woman shot back, but her voice was drowned out by the growing chorus of complaints. Ethan, meanwhile, had progressed to a state that Malik recognized as complete sensory overload. But Malik ignored them all. His focus was entirely on Ethan, on the familiar signs of a nervous system pushed beyond its limits. He moved slowly, carefully, making sure he was in Ethan's peripheral vision before getting too close. He didn't want to surprise him, didn't want to add another layer of sensory input to an already overwhelmed child. When he was close enough, Malik did something that made Richard's eyes widen in shock. He didn't try to touch Ethan. He didn't raise his voice. Instead, he knelt down beside the seat, making himself smaller, less threatening, and began to speak in the softest, most measured voice imaginable. "It's okay," Malik said, his words barely audible over Ethan's cries, but somehow cutting through nonetheless. "I know it's too loud. I know it hurts. I'm here now. You're not alone." For the first time since takeoff, Ethan's sobs faltered, just for a second, but it was enough to give everyone hope. Malik reached into his backpack, moving slowly, telegraphing every movement so Ethan could see what was happening. He pulled out a small toy car, its red paint chipped and faded, one was slightly wonky. It was nothing special, nothing expensive, just a toy that had been loved hard by a boy who didn't have much else. Without saying anything, Malik placed the car on Ethan's tray table and gave it a gentle push. It rolled crooked, its broken wheel making it curve in a small arc. Ethan's eyes tracked the movement, his body still tense, but no longer actively thrashing. The car stopped at the edge of the tray, and Malik reached over to push it back, creating a slow, predictable pattern of movement. The cabin held its collective breath as Ethan watched the car roll back and forth, back and forth. His hands, which had been hitting his face moments before, slowly lowered. "That's it," Malik whispered, continuing the rhythmic motion with the car. "Just watch the car. Nothing else matters right now. Just the car." Richard stared at the scene unfolding before him with a mixture of awe and something that felt dangerously close to shame. This child, this poor kid from economy class with his worn clothes and broken toy, was doing what Richard with all his resources couldn't do. He was reaching Ethan. Slowly, so slowly that it was almost imperceptible, Ethan's breathing began to regulate. His body, which had been rigid with panic, started to soften. His eyes remained fixed on the toy car, but his hands unclenched, his shoulders dropped. "You want to try?" Malik asked gently, still not making any move to touch Ethan, respecting his space in a way that Richard realized he never had. Ethan's hand moved hesitantly toward the car. His fingers brushed against it, and Malik immediately pulled his own hand back, letting Ethan take control. The boy pushed the car, watching it roll, and for the first time since they'd boarded the plane, his face showed something other than distress. "See?" Malik said softly. "You're the driver. You're in control. The car goes where you want it to go." It was such a simple thing, but Richard could see the profound effect it was having. Control. Ethan never had control over anything in his structured, therapy-filled life. Every moment was scheduled, managed, directed by adults who thought they knew best. But here was this other child, giving him agency over something small but meaningful. The passengers who had been complaining moments before were now silent, watching the scene with expressions ranging from surprise to shame. The businessman who had demanded Ethan be removed from the flight had turned back around, his shoulders hunched as if trying to make himself smaller. Ethan pushed the car again, and this time, a tiny sound escaped his lips. Not a cry or a scream, but something that might have been the beginning of a laugh. "That's a fast car," Malik said, his voice still soft but now carrying a note of playful engagement. "I bet it could win any race." Ethan looked at Malik then, really looked at him, making eye contact for a brief moment before returning his attention to the car. But in that moment, Richard saw something he rarely saw in his son's eyes: trust. The entire first-class cabin remained silent as Ethan continued to play with the toy car, his breathing now completely normal, his body relaxed. The transformation was nothing short of miraculous, and everyone knew they had witnessed something extraordinary. A woman who had been among the complainers earlier whispered to her husband, "How did he do that?" But Malik hadn't done anything special. Not really. He just remembered what his aunt had taught him about Marcus, about all kids like Ethan. Sometimes they don't need to be fixed or controlled or managed. Sometimes they just need someone to see them as they are, not as the world wants them to be. As the plane continued its climb to cruising altitude, Ethan kept playing with the car, occasionally making small sounds that Malik would echo back, creating a private conversation that needed no words. Richard sat frozen in his seat, watching his son interact with this stranger in a way he'd never managed to achieve himself. The act closed with the cabin settling into an uneasy quiet, passengers stealing glances at the unlikely pair while Richard stared out the window, his reflection showing a man whose entire worldview had just been shattered by a 12-year-old boy with a broken toy car. The gentle hum of the aircraft at cruising altitude created a strange cocoon of calm after the earlier chaos. Ethan sat with the toy car clutched in his small hands, rolling it back and forth across the tray table in a rhythm that seemed to match his breathing. Malik remained kneeling beside the seat, patient and still, like he had all the time in the world. Richard watched his son's face transform from distressed to peaceful, something he hadn't seen happen this quickly in years of behavioral therapy sessions. The other first-class passengers had settled into an uncomfortable silence, some pretending to read magazines while stealing glances at the unusual scene, others openly staring with expressions that ranged from curiosity to disbelief. "What's your name?" Ethan asked suddenly, his voice small but clear. It was the first coherent sentence he'd spoken since boarding. "I'm Malik," the boy answered gently. "What's yours?" "Ethan." He pushed the car toward Malik. "The wheel is broken." "Yeah, it is," Malik agreed, not making excuses or promising to fix it. "But it still rolls." Sometimes broken things work in their own way. An older woman across the aisle lowered her newspaper, her earlier hostility softening as she watched the interaction. Her husband nudged her, whispering something about how remarkable it was, but she shushed him, not wanting to break whatever spell had settled over the cabin. Richard felt an urge to reassert himself, to take control of the situation that had spiraled so far beyond his grasp. "Ethan," he said, his voice carrying that commanding tone he couldn't quite shake, "give the toy back to the boy. You need to sit properly. We have 3 more hours." Ethan's reaction was immediate and visceral. He clutched the card to his chest and turned his entire body toward Malik, away from his father. "No!" The word came out sharp and defensive. The rejection hit Richard like a physical blow. His son had chosen a stranger over him, publicly, in front of all these people who already thought he was a failure as a father. Malik caught Richard's eye and offered a small, understanding smile. "Sometimes they need transitional objects," he explained quietly, using terminology that surprised Richard. "My cousin Marcus, he's like Ethan. When he finds something that makes him feel safe, taking it away too fast can trigger another meltdown." "Your cousin," Richard repeated slowly, trying to process this information. This child, who couldn't be older than 12 or 13, understood his son better than he did. "Yes, sir. He's 7. Lives with my aunt back home." Malik's voice carried no pride or superiority, just simple fact. "I help take care of him sometimes." "Well, used to." The past tense hung in the air, but before Richard could ask about it, Ethan started humming. It wasn't a melody exactly, more like a pattern of notes, repetitive and soothing. Without missing a beat, Malik began humming along, matching Ethan's rhythm perfectly. Ethan's eyes widened with delight. He'd never had anyone echo him before. His therapist tried to redirect his humming, his father tried to quiet it, but here was someone who just accepted it, participated in it. "How are you doing this?" Richard asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The question came out more vulnerable than he'd intended, stripped of his usual authority. Malik shrugged, still humming along with Ethan. Between notes, he explained, "I just listen. Most people try to make kids like Ethan fit into their world. But sometimes you gotta enter theirs first." A flight attendant approached with a beverage cart, and the sudden movement made Ethan tense. Malik noticed immediately and shifted his position slightly, putting himself between Ethan and the perceived threat. "It's okay," Malik said softly. "Just the drink cart. Want to watch the car while they pass." Ethan nodded and focused on rolling the toy again, using it as an anchor while the disruption moved through the cabin. Richard watched, astounded by how Malik seemed to anticipate Ethan's needs before they became problems. "Apple juice?" the flight attendant asked, directing the question to Richard. "Ethan doesn't," Richard began, but Malik interrupted gently. "What color is apple juice?" Malik asked Ethan. "Yellow," Ethan answered, still focused on the car. "Like the sun. Do you like yellow?" Ethan considered this seriously. "Sometimes. Not when it's too bright." "This yellow is not too bright," Malik assured him, and somehow, that simple exchange made it okay for Ethan to accept the juice when it came in his plastic cup. Richard felt something crack inside his chest. For years, he'd been forcing decisions on Ethan, assuming he knew best, never thinking to involve his son in these small choices. He'd read all the books about autism, hired the best specialists, but he'd never learned this simple thing. Ask, don't assume. The businessman who'd complained earlier had turned around again, but this time his expression was different. "That's quite a gift you have there, young man," he said to Malik, his tone almost apologetic. Malik looked uncomfortable with the praise. "It's not a gift. I just remember what it's like to feel different." "Different how?" the man's wife asked, leaning forward with genuine interest. Malik hesitated, then looked at Ethan, who was now tapping his fingers on the tray table in a complex pattern. "Everyone's got something that makes them not fit quite right. Some people just hide it better." Ethan had started his tapping pattern again, but this time, instead of trying to stop him, Malik watched for a moment, then began tapping his own pattern on his knee. Not the same pattern, but complementary, like two instruments playing different parts of the same song. Ethan giggled. It was soft, almost inaudible, but it was there. A genuine expression of joy that Richard hadn't heard in months. "You're playing music," Ethan said, looking at Malik with wonder. "We both are," Malik replied. "Want to make a new song?" For the next several minutes, they created rhythms together, Ethan leading, Malik following, then switching. Other passengers began to relax, some even smiling at the impromptu performance. A little girl in the row behind them started tapping along on her armrest until her mother gently stopped her. Richard felt like an outsider watching his own son through a window. He wanted to participate, but didn't know how. Every instinct told him to impose order, to set boundaries, to be the adult in charge. But those instincts had failed him so completely that he didn't trust them anymore. "Ethan," Richard tried again, softer this time. Can I play too?" Ethan looked at his father with an expression that was hard to read. There was wariness there, built from too many times when joining meant correcting, when attention meant criticism. But Malik nodded encouragingly. "Show your dad the pattern," Malik suggested. "He could be the drums." Tentatively, Ethan demonstrated his 7-3 pattern, the same one from earlier, but slower now, more deliberate. Richard watched, then tried to replicate it on his armrest. He got it wrong the first time, starting to tap too fast. "No," Ethan said, but not harshly. He reached over and took his father's hand, guiding it through the pattern. "Like this. 7 fast, 3 slow." It was the first time Ethan had voluntarily touched him in weeks. Richard's eyes burned with unshed tears as he followed his son's guidance, learning the pattern that had always annoyed him before. Around them, he became aware of a shift in the cabin's atmosphere. The hostility from earlier was dissipating, replaced by something softer, more understanding. "That's perfect," Malik said when Richard got it right, and Richard realized the boy was talking to both of them. A woman across the aisle who'd been one of the harshest critics earlier was now watching with wet eyes. "I'm sorry," she said suddenly, addressing Richard. "I didn't understand. My nephew. I should have recognized. I'm sorry." Richard nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Apologies were something he rarely received and even more rarely accepted, but this one felt necessary, healing even. The captain's voice came over the intercom announcing slight turbulence ahead, and Ethan immediately tensed. But before Richard could panic about another meltdown, Malik was already responding. "Hey, remember the superhero plane I mentioned?" Malik said, his voice taking on a storytelling quality. "This is just it flexing its muscles, showing how strong it is." "Planes don't have muscles," Ethan said, but he was intrigued despite himself. "Sure they do. What do you think keeps the wings on?" "Super strong airplane muscles." Malik flexed his own skinny arm, making Ethan laugh outright. The turbulence hit, gentle bumps that would normally send Ethan into a spiral. But he was too focused on Malik's story about the superhero plane that fought against invisible air monsters to notice much. "Is my daddy on the superhero plane too?" Ethan asked suddenly, catching both Richard and Malik off guard. "Everyone on this plane is," Malik said without hesitation. "Even the grumpy people. Sometimes superheroes are grumpy." "Daddy's grumpy a lot," Ethan said matter-of-factly, and several passengers couldn't help but chuckle. Richard felt his face flush, but then Ethan added, "But he's sad too, since Mommy went to heaven." The cabin went silent. Richard felt exposed, laid bare in front of strangers by his son's innocent honesty. But Malik just nodded, understanding in his young eyes. "My mom's sick," Malik said quietly. "Real sick. That's why I'm on this plane. Going to live with my aunt 'cause Mom can't take care of me right now." Ethan processed this information seriously. "Will she go to heaven too?" "I don't know," Malik answered honestly. "I hope not." "Me too," Ethan said, and then did something that shocked everyone, including Malik. He placed the toy car carefully on the tray table and reached over to take Malik's hand. "You can share my—" Ethan stirred slightly, murmuring something in his sleep. Both Richard and Malik held their breath until he settled again. "You're going to live with your aunt?" Richard asked, trying to keep the conversation going, finding himself genuinely interested in this boy's story. "Aunt Sheila, in Chicago. She's got 3 kids of her own already, plus Marcus. Not a lot of room, but she says family makes room." Malik shifted slightly, careful not to jostle Ethan. "I'll probably have to share a bed with my cousin Jerome. He kicks in his sleep." Richard thought about Ethan's bedroom at home. 1,500 square feet, bigger than most apartments, filled with every therapeutic toy and sensory tool money could buy. Most of it in used, rejected, or broken in frustrated tantrums. "She speaks real highly of you," Malik said. It took Richard a moment to realize he meant his aunt. "Says you got a gift with Marcus. That he's a different kid when you're around. I just understand him, I guess. We're both different, just in different ways." A passenger in the row ahead turned around. It was the woman who'd apologized earlier. "Excuse me, young man. I couldn't help but overhear. You said your mother has cancer." Malik nodded, uncomfortable with the attention. "My sister went through the same thing. If you need, there are programs. Financial assistance. I could give you some information." "That's kind of you, ma'am, but we've tried all that. Insurance says experimental treatments aren't covered. The ones that might actually help." Malik's voice was matter-of-fact, resigned to realities no 12-year-old should have to accept. Richard's tablet buzzed again. This time, it was an email about a charity gala he was supposed to attend next week. $50,000 a table, proceeds going to some cause he couldn't even remember. $50,000. More than Diana Johnson would see in a year, probably 2 years. The plane hit another pocket of turbulence, stronger this time. Ethan's eyes flew open, immediate panic setting in as his half-awake mind tried to process where he was. Hey, it's okay," Malik soothed, already anticipating the reaction. "Remember the superhero plane? It's just doing loop-de-loops. But Ethan was already spiraling, his breathing quickening. "Where's Mommy? I want Mommy." Richard's heart shattered. Ethan hadn't asked for his mother in months, had seemed to accept her absence with an emotional distance that the therapist said was concerning. But here, vulnerable and scared, the truth came out. "Mommy's in heaven, remember?" Richard said gently, reaching for his son. "No." Ethan pushed his father's hand away, turning instead to bury his face in Malik's shirt. "She said she wouldn't leave. She promised." Malik wrapped his arms around the younger boy, looking helplessly at Richard over Ethan's head. "Sometimes people have to break promises," he said softly. "Not because they want to, but because they don't have a choice." "Like your mom?" Ethan asked, his voice muffled against Malik's chest. "Yeah, like my mom." Richard watched his son find comfort in their shared loss, bonding with this stranger over grief that Richard had tried to manage with therapy and routine instead of honest emotion. A flight attendant approached with snack service, and Richard waved her away, but she persisted. "Sir, the captain wanted me to check on your son. Is everything all right?" "We're fine," Richard said automatically. "Actually," Malik spoke up, "do you have any crackers? The plain kind? Sometimes eating something crunchy helps." The attendant smiled and produced a package of saltines. Malik opened them carefully, making sure the crinkling wasn't too loud, and offered one to Ethan. "Want to see who can make the loudest crunch?" Malik suggested. It was such a simple thing, turning a potential sensory trigger into a game, but it worked. Ethan took a cracker and bit down hard, the sound making him giggle through his tears. "I win," he declared. "No way. Listen to this," Malik countered, biting his own cracker with exaggerated force. Soon they were both laughing, and even some of the surrounding passengers were smiling at the innocent competition. The businessman from earlier had turned around again. Richard tensed, expecting another complaint, but the man's expression was different now. "I owe you an apology," he said to Richard. "Both of you," he added, looking at Ethan. "My brother had autism. Has autism. We didn't know what it was back then in the 60s. My parents just sent him away to an institution. I haven't seen him in 30 years. The confession hung heavy in the air. His wife reached over and took his hand. "Maybe you should," Malik suggested quietly. "Visit him, I mean. It's never too late for family." The man nodded, his eyes wet. "You're right. You're absolutely right." Ethan had been listening to all of this, processing in his unique way. "Is your brother like me?" he asked the man. "I don't know," the man admitted. "I never took the time to find out." "That's sad," Ethan said simply. "Malik takes time. Daddy's learning to take time." Richard felt the words like a challenge and a forgiveness all at once. His son saw him trying, even if he was failing more than succeeding. The captain's voice came over the intercom again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our initial descent into Chicago. We should be on the ground in about 45 minutes. Chicago, where Malik would get off and disappear into a life Richard knew nothing about. Where this boy who had saved his son, who had taught him more about parenting in 3 hours than years of books and specialists, would walk away. "I don't want Malik to go," Ethan said immediately, his voice rising with distress. "He has to go to his family," Richard explained, though the words felt hollow. "His aunt is waiting for him. But he's my friend." Ethan's voice was getting louder, and several passengers tensed, worried about another meltdown. Malik squeezed Ethan's hand. "Hey, friends don't stop being friends just because they're far apart. Look, I'll write down my aunt's address. You can send me letters. Maybe pictures of that superhero plane." "I don't write good," Ethan said, frustrated. "My letters are all wrong." "They're not wrong. They're yours," Malik said firmly. "That makes them perfect." Richard pulled out his phone. We could exchange contact information, if your aunt wouldn't mind. Maybe video calls." Malik's face lit up. "Really? You do that?" "Of course," Richard said, then added more quietly, "You've given me my son back. There's no amount of money that could repay that." "I don't want money," Malik said quickly. And Richard could see the pride there, the same pride that kept his mother working despite her illness, that kept this family together despite everything. "I know," Richard said. "I just meant thank you. That's all." The plane descended through the clouds, and Ethan gripped both Malik's hand and, To Richard's surprise, his father's as well. The three of them connected in that moment, an unlikely trio brought together by circumstance and held together by something deeper than mere chance. A passenger behind them had been filming discreetly on her phone, capturing moments of the interaction. She'd already posted some of it online with the caption, "You won't believe what I'm witnessing on this flight. This young boy is an angel." The comments were already pouring in, the story going viral even before they landed. But none of them knew about that yet. All they knew was this moment, this connection, this fragile piece that had been built from chaos. "Daddy," Ethan said suddenly. "Malik doesn't have a daddy with him." Richard's throat tightened. "No, he doesn't. Can he borrow you? Just for a little while?" Malik looked embarrassed. "Ethan, I don't need—" "Everyone needs a daddy sometimes," Ethan said with the authority of someone who'd figured out something important. "Even daddies need daddies. That's what grandpa is for." Richard thought about his own father, distant and cold, dead 5 years now, without ever really knowing his grandson. Another generation of failed connections. "Ethan's right," Richard said suddenly. "Everyone needs family. Support." He looked at Malik. "Your aunt, does she need help? With your mother's medical bills, I mean?" Malik's pride warred with practicality on his face. "We manage. That's not what I ask." The descent continued, ears popping with pressure changes. Ethan whimpered slightly, but calmed when Malik showed him how to yawn to release the pressure. "There are bills," Malik finally admitted. "Lots of bills. Aunt Sheila's already taken a second mortgage on her house to help pay for Mom's treatment." Richard nodded, his mind already working through possibilities, connections, the best oncologists in Chicago. For once, his money could do something meaningful, something real. "We're going to help," Ethan announced, as if it was already decided. "Because that's what friends do." The plane descended lower, the Chicago skyline visible through the windows. The flight that had started in chaos was ending with something none of them had expected. Connection, understanding, and the first fragile threads of a friendship that would change all their lives. The Chicago skyline grew larger in the windows as the plane continued its descent. Richard forced himself to smile at Malik, trying to project a composure he didn't feel. Inside, his chest felt hollow, like something essential was being carved out with each foot they dropped toward the runway. "Thank you again," he said to Malik, the words coming out stiffer than he intended, his business voice creeping back in despite his efforts. "You've been exceptional." A woman across the aisle leaned forward, her eyes bright with emotion. "You really are a blessing, young man," she said to Malik. "What you did for this family today." Richard felt his jaw clench involuntarily. This family, as if they were some charity case, some problem that needed solving by a 12-year-old boy. He was Richard Hale. He'd built an empire from nothing. He'd addressed Congress. He'd been on the cover of Fortune magazine 3 times. And yet here he was, reduced to a footnote in the story of a poor boy's kindness. He just needed a friend, Malik said quietly, uncomfortable with the praise. "Ethan's really cool once you understand him." Ethan was still gripping Malik's hand, but he'd also moved closer to his father, creating a bridge between them. "Daddy, can Malik come to our house? He has to go to his aunt's house, remember?" Richard said, trying to keep his voice gentle despite the turmoil inside. "She's waiting for him." But after that, Ethan insisted. "Tomorrow." "I don't think," Malik started, but Ethan interrupted. "You have to come. I can show you my trains. I have 73 trains. They all go on tracks. Some are broken, but Daddy says that's okay." Richard remembered that conversation, one of the few successful ones they'd had. Ethan had been distraught over a broken locomotive, and Richard, in a rare moment of insight, had said that broken things could still be valuable. He hadn't realized Ethan had held onto those words. "Maybe we can figure something out," Richard said carefully, his hands trembling slightly. The thought of Malik leaving, of going back to the way things were before, terrified him more than any board meeting ever had. He reached into his jacket pocket for his business card, the motion automatic practice from thousands of networking events. But as he held the expensive cardstock with its gold embossing, he realized how absurd it was. What was he going to do? Have a 12-year-old email his assistant? "I'll write down my number," Malik offered, pulling out his battered notebook. His handwriting was careful, neat, the kind that came from taking pride in what little you had. My aunt's number 2. She want to thank you for being kind about me sitting here. Kind. Richard almost laughed. He hadn't been kind. He'd been desperate, humiliated, and then astounded. Kindness had nothing to do with it. Ethan was rocking slightly in his seat again, but it wasn't distress this time. Richard recognized it as his processing motion, the way he worked through big emotions. Malik's mommy is sick, he announced suddenly to anyone listening. She might go to heaven like my mommy. Several passengers turned to look, their faces softening with sympathy. Richard saw Malik's shoulders tense, his pride warring with the exposure of his private pain. That's very sad, the woman who'd called him a blessing said gently. Is that why you're traveling alone? Malik nodded, his fingers absently straightening the worn edge of his notebook. She needs special care. My aunt can take care of me while. He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. While she gets better, Ethan said firmly, with the kind of certainty that only children could muster. Medicine makes people better. Daddy says science fixes things. Richard's chest tightened. He told Ethan that about his mother before they knew the cancer had metastasized, before the doctor started talking about comfort care instead of cure. Sometimes, Malik said carefully, not wanting to hurt Ethan with the truth but unable to lie. Sometimes medicine helps a lot. The plane banked slightly, turning for final approach. The movement made Ethan grip tighter to both Malik and Richard. For a moment, Richard felt what it could be like being connected to his son through something other than obligation and frustration. His phone buzzed insistently in his pocket. Without looking, he knew it was his assistant, probably panicking about him being out of contact for so long. Richard Hale never went 3 hours without checking in, without commanding something, controlling something. Your phone, Ethan said, the sound clearly bothering him. It's not important, Richard said, and this time he meant it. He pulled the phone out and, in a move that would have been unthinkable 4 hours ago, powered it off completely. Malik watched him with those perceptive eyes. My mom does that too. Turns it off when we're having important talks. This is an important talk, Ethan asked. All talks with friends are important, Malik said simply. Friends. The word sat strangely in Richard's mind. His son had never had a friend before, not really. There had been carefully orchestrated playdates with the children of business associates, all disasters. There had been social skills groups that felt more like corporate training sessions for toddlers. But a friend? Someone who just accepted Ethan as he was? Never. We're beginning our final descent into O'Hare International Airport, the captain announced. Flight attendants, please prepare for landing. The energy in the cabin shifted, people starting to gather their belongings, check their phones, prepare for re-entry into their regular lives. But in their row, nobody moved. I don't want to land, Ethan said quietly, and Richard understood. Up here, in this strange bubble, something magical had happened. Once they landed, would it disappear? A businessman in the row behind them leaned forward. Richard recognized him vaguely from some conference or another. Hale, isn't it? Richard Hale. Richard nodded curtly, waiting for whatever came next. A pitch, probably, or worse, condescending sympathy about his situation. I just wanted to say, the man continued, his voice unexpectedly genuine, what I've witnessed today, it's changed my perspective on a lot of things. Your son is lucky to have you. Richard almost laughed. Lucky? His son who just spent 3 hours finding comfort in a stranger's arms because his own father didn't know how to reach him? Actually, Richard said, his voice tight, I'm the lucky one. Lucky this young man was here. He gestured to Malik. I wasn't able to. The words stuck in his throat. Richard Hale didn't admit failure. He spun narratives, controlled perspectives, managed outcomes. But here, surrounded by strangers who'd witnessed his complete breakdown as a father, pretense seemed pointless. You were trying, Malik said quietly. That matters, does it? Richard asked, and the rawness in his voice surprised him. I've been trying for 9 years. Throwing money at therapists, specialists, programs. But you didn't see him, Malik finished gently. It's hard to see when you're scared. I'm not scared. Richard said automatically, then stopped. Who was he kidding? He was terrified every single day. Terrified of failing Ethan, of being the father his own father had been, cold and distant and demanding. Ethan had been listening to all of this, his head tilted in that way that meant he was processing deeply. Daddy is scared of a lot of things, he announced. Scared of hugs. Scared of being late. Scared of me. The last words hit Richard like a physical blow. Ethan, no, I'm not scared of you. Yes, you are, Ethan said matter-of-factly. Your face does the scared thing when I get loud. Or when I don't act like other kids. Malik's face doesn't do that. Richard wanted to deny it, but his son was right. He was scared of Ethan, or rather, scared of his own inability to be what Ethan needed. Fear's not always bad, Malik offered. My mom says being scared just means something matters to you. You're scared because you love him. The plane was descending more steeply now, the ground rushing up to meet them. Richard could see cars on the highway below, people going about their normal lives, unaware of the small drama playing out above them. His mind drifted unbidden to Sarah, his late wife. She'd been the one who understood Ethan, who could calm him with a touch, who never seemed frustrated by his differences. You have to learn his language, she told Richard once. He's speaking all the time. You just have to learn to listen. But Richard had been too busy building his empire, convinced that providing financially was his primary job as a father. Sarah had tried to tell him otherwise, but he'd always assumed there would be time later. Later, when the company was more stable. Later, when the deal was closed. Later, when things calmed down. Later had never come. Sarah had gotten sick, and then sicker, and then she was gone, leaving Richard with a son he'd never learned to understand. Daddy's crying, Ethan observed, reaching out to touch Richard's face. Richard hadn't realized tears were sliding down his cheeks. In front of everyone, the great Richard Hale was crying. But for once, he didn't care about appearances. Yeah, he said roughly. Sometimes daddies cry too. Like when mommy went to heaven. Yeah, like that. And like now, when I realize how much I've missed. The wheels touched down with a gentle bump, and the plane began to slow. Around them, people were already reaching for their bags, checking their phones, preparing to rush off to their next appointment. But in their row, time seemed suspended. Mr. Hale, Malik said formally, as if he'd made a decision. Would it be okay if I gave Ethan something? To remember me? Richard nodded, not trusting his voice. Malik reached into his backpack and pulled out his notebook, the one with all his drawings. He carefully tore out a page and handed it to Ethan. It was the drawing he'd made during the flight, of Ethan smiling next to the superhero plane. But this is yours, Ethan protested. Now it's ours, Malik said. Friends share the important stuff. As the plane taxied toward the gate, a curious flight attendant who'd been watching the interaction all flight finally approached their row. She knelt down beside Malik's seat, her expression gentle. Sweetheart, I noticed you're traveling alone. Is someone meeting you at the gate? Malik nodded. My Aunt Sheila. She'll have a sign with my name. Where are you coming from? She asked, clearly touched by what she'd witnessed. Malik hesitated, his fingers playing with the strap of his backpack. The question seemed simple, but the answer carried so much weight. New York, Queens specifically. My mom. She's at Mount Sinai Hospital. The passengers who were still seated nearby grew quiet, listening. Even those who'd been rushing to gather their belongings slowed down. She wanted to come with me, Malik continued, his voice getting smaller. She tried to get out of bed, said she needed to make sure I got here safe. But the nurses, he trailed off, the memory too fresh, too painful. Ethan, who'd been listening intently, suddenly piped up with a question that only he would ask. Does your mommy need help? The directness of it, the pure innocence, seemed to break something open in Malik. Yeah, he whispered. She needs a lot of help. Richard felt his chest constrict. This boy, who'd spent the last 3 hours helping them, was carrying a burden no child should have to bear. What kind of cancer? He asked gently. Lung cancer. Stage 4. Started about a year ago, but we didn't know until 6 months back. She kept saying it was just a cold, didn't want to miss work. Malik's voice was steady, but his hands were shaking slightly. She cleaned offices at night. 20 years at the same building. Turns out it was full of asbestos. Several passengers made sounds of sympathy. Richard's mind was already calculating, thinking about lawyers, settlements, treatment options. The company that owns the building, Richard said carefully, have they taken responsibility? Malik shook his head. They say she can't prove that's where she got sick. Could have been anywhere, they said. Their lawyers are. He paused, searching for the right word. They're mean. A passenger a few rows up turned around. He was an older man in an expensive suit. Did you say the building had asbestos? For 20 years. Malik nodded. Other people got sick too. 3 other cleaners. But the company says it's coincidence. The man pulled out a business card. I'm a partner at Brennan, Fitzgerald, and Associates. We specialize in environmental law. This sounds like criminal negligence. Richard recognized the firm. They were giants in their field, the kind of lawyers that corporations feared. You should listen to him, he told Malik. That firm doesn't lose. But Malik was shaking his head. We can't afford lawyers like that. We can barely afford the hospital bills. Pro bono, the lawyer said firmly. Cases like this, with multiple victims and clear negligence, we take them pro bono. The publicity alone is worth it, and frankly, it's the right thing to do. Ethan had been processing all of this in his unique way. Suddenly, he snapped at a woman who'd made a snide comment earlier in the flight, the one who'd suggested Malik would probably ask for money. Don't talk about him like that. Ethan's voice was sharp, protective. Malik is good. He helps people. Everyone turned to stare. It was the first time anyone had heard Ethan defend someone else, the first time he'd shown this kind of outward emotional engagement. Malik squeezed Ethan's hand gratefully. It's okay. Some people just don't understand. They should understand, Ethan said firmly. Understanding is important. Malik understands. He understood me. The plane had reached the gate, and the seatbelt sign dinged off. People began standing, but nobody in the surrounding rows moved, all caught up in the unfolding story. A woman who'd been sitting quietly across the aisle suddenly spoke up. Young man, I work for the Tribune. Your story, what you did today, people should know about it. Malik looked uncomfortable. I didn't do anything special. You calmed a child in distress when his own father couldn't, she said gently. You showed more emotional intelligence and compassion than most adults, while dealing with your own family crisis. That's extraordinary. Richard watched Malik shrink under the attention, and he recognized something of himself in the boy. Not the current version of himself, but the young Richard before money and power had calcified his heart. The Richard who'd believed in helping people and making a difference. He doesn't want publicity, Richard said firmly, his protective instincts kicking in. He's a child dealing with enough. The woman nodded respectfully and sat back, but Richard could see her mentally filing the story away. Can I tell you about my mommy? Ethan asked Malik suddenly. Since I know about yours? Malik nodded, even though they should have been deplaning. She smelled like flowers, Ethan said. Not real flowers. The fake ones from the blue bottle. She sang songs wrong on purpose to make me laugh. She never got mad when I couldn't sleep. She said I was perfect, even when I wasn't. She sounds wonderful, Malik said softly. She was, Ethan agreed. Daddy was different when she was here. He smiled more. He came home for dinner. He played trains with me, but only when Mommy made him. Richard felt each word like a small dagger. His son had noticed everything, had cataloged the decline of their family with the same precise attention he gave to his train schedules. But he's trying now, Ethan added, looking at his father. Today he turned off his phone. That's new. The simple observation brought unexpected laughter from several passengers. Even Richard managed a small smile through his emotional turmoil. Your mom, Richard said to Malik, tell me about her. Not the illness. Her. Malik's face transformed, a real smile breaking through for the first time. She makes the best mac and cheese in the world. Not from a box, from scratch. She can't cook much anymore, but she still tells me how to make it over the phone. She reads everything. Like everything. The newspaper, every book from the library, even the ingredients on cereal boxes. She says knowledge is the only thing nobody can take from you. Smart, Richard said, meaning it. She is. She should have gone to college, but she had me instead. Never made me feel bad about it, though. Said I was her greatest achievement. Malik's voice caught. I just wish her achievement hadn't cost her so much. You didn't cost her anything, a grandmother nearby said firmly. Children aren't costs. They're investments. And from what I've seen today, you're paying dividends. The flight attendant from earlier returned. I'm sorry, but we really need to begin deplaning. The next flight needs this gate. People began moving reluctantly, gathering their things. But there was something different about the energy now. Strangers were helping each other with bags, making eye contact, smiling. The shared experience had changed them all in small ways. As they stood to leave, Ethan grabbed onto Malik with both hands. No, he can't go. Ethan, Richard started, but Malik was already handling it. Remember what I said? Friends don't stop being friends just because they're apart. And hey, Chicago isn't that far from New York. Maybe your dad can bring you to visit sometimes. Richard found himself nodding before he'd really thought it through. Of course, whenever you want. A man who'd been one of the early complainers cleared his throat. On a restaurant chain, we're always looking for good people. If your aunt needs work, or when your mom is better, have them call me. He handed Malik a card. Good pay, full benefits, including health insurance. Malik looked overwhelmed. I don't. Why would you? Because today, you reminded us all what actually matters, the man said simply. They moved slowly toward the exit, Ethan between Richard and Malik, holding both their hands. Other passengers let them go first, a sign of respect that Richard found oddly touching. As they entered the jet bridge, Malik suddenly stopped. Mr. Hale, can I ask you something? Of course. How do you do it? Keep going, I mean. After losing someone you love. Richard thought about lying, about offering some platitude about time healing all wounds. But Malik deserved better. I don't know, he admitted. I've been doing it wrong. Focusing on work instead of what matters. But today, he looked at his son, then at Malik. Today I learned that maybe the answer is connection, not trying to do it alone. Malik nodded slowly, wise beyond his years. My mom says grief shared is grief halved, and joy shared is joy doubled. Ethan added unexpectedly. Mommy used to say that. They emerged into the gate area, and Richard immediately spotted the woman who had to be Aunt Sheila. She had Malik's kind eyes and was holding a handmade sign with his name in glittery letters. When she saw Malik, her face broke into a relieved smile. There's my baby, she called out, opening her arms wide. Malik hesitated, embarrassed to be called baby in front of everyone, but then ran into her embrace. Richard watched, his heart aching at the obvious love between them. Aunt Sheila, Malik said, pulling back. This is Ethan and his dad, Mr. Hale. They're my friends from the plane. Sheila looked at Richard with curious eyes, taking an expensive suit, the first-class tags on their bags. Thank you for looking after my nephew, she said carefully. Actually, Richard said, he looked after us. Before Sheila could respond, Ethan tugged on her sleeve. Malik helped me when I was scared. He has a cousin like me. Marcus. Can I meet Marcus? Sheila's expression softened. You're like my Marcus? Well then, you're extra special, aren't you? Malik says I'm perfect how I am, Ethan announced. And he's absolutely right, Sheila agreed, then looked at Malik with pride. You always did have a gift with children. It's not a gift, Malik said. That same humility from earlier. I just remember what it's like to feel different. Richard pulled out his wallet, then hesitated. Money had been his solution to everything for so long, but he'd learned today that some things were beyond its reach. Still, your mother's treatment, he said to Malik. I have connections at Sloan Kettering, Johns Hopkins, the best oncologists in the country. If you let me make some calls. Sheila's pride warred with practicality on her face, the same expression Malik had worn earlier. We don't take charity. It's not charity, Ethan interrupted, his voice clear and certain. It's what friends do. Right, Malik? Malik nodded, tears sliding down his cheeks. Right? Richard knelt down to Ethan's level, then to everyone's surprise, extended his hand to Malik for a proper handshake. Thank you, he said formally, for showing me what I was missing. Malik shook his hand solemnly. You weren't missing it. You just couldn't see it yet. As they prepared to part ways, other passengers from their flight lingered nearby, many approaching Malik with cards, offers of help, words of encouragement. The businessman offered legal services. The restaurant owner repeated his job offer, Others simply wanted to shake his hand. "Look what you started," Richard said to Malik, gesturing at the crowd. But Malik shook his head, looking at Ethan. He started it by being brave enough to be himself on that plane. That's what changed everyone. Ethan beamed at this, the kind of pure joy Richard hadn't seen in months. As they finally had to separate, Ethan refused to let go of Malik until the older boy promised to call that very night. "We can show Marcus the superhero plane drawing," Ethan said. "It's a date," Malik agreed. Walking away, Richard heard Sheila asking Malik about what happened on the plane. He heard other passengers already on their phones, telling others about what they'd witnessed. He saw people looking at Ethan not with annoyance or pity, but with genuine warmth. The story was already spreading, Richard realized. But more importantly, something had fundamentally changed in him. For the first time since Sarah's death, he felt like maybe, just maybe, he could learn to be the father Ethan needed. 20 minutes after their emotional goodbye at the gate, Richard and Ethan were seated in the terminal's first-class lounge, waiting for their connecting flight to Los Angeles. But neither of them could settle. Ethan kept pulling out the drawing Malik had given him, tracing the lines of the superhero plane with his finger, while Richard stared at his powered-off phone like it was a foreign object. "Daddy," Ethan said suddenly, "we made a mistake." Richard's heart skipped. "What mistake?" "We didn't get on Malik's plane. He's alone now." Richard was about to explain that Malik had taken a car with his aunt, not another plane, when the lounge's television caught his attention. The local news was on, and there on the screen was shaky phone footage from their flight. He could see himself, disheveled and desperate, watching as Malik calmed Ethan with the toy car. The video has already been viewed over 2 million times in just the past hour, the anchor was saying. The young boy, identified only as Malik, was traveling alone to Chicago while his mother battles cancer. Richard felt his stomach drop. This was exactly the kind of attention he'd always tried to avoid, the kind that made you vulnerable, exposed. But as he watched the footage, he saw something he hadn't noticed in the moment. The look of pure wonder on his own face as Malik succeeded where he had failed. "That's us," Ethan exclaimed, pointing at the screen. "We're on TV. Look, there's Malik." Other travelers in the lounge were beginning to notice, making the connection between the television and the father and son sitting right there. Richard braced himself for the usual responses he got when recognized: networking attempts, investment pitches, false friendliness. But instead, a woman approached them slowly, almost reverently. "Excuse me," she said softly. "I just wanted to say, I have a grandson with autism. Watching that video gave me hope. Your friend, that young boy, he's something special." Before Richard could respond, the lounge's calm atmosphere was shattered by an announcement. "Attention, all passengers. Due to severe weather moving in from the west, all outbound flights are temporarily grounded. We anticipate delays of at least 3 to 4 hours." Ethan's reaction was immediate. His body went rigid, the drawing crumpling in his suddenly clenched fist. "No, we have to go. We have to fly." "It's okay," Richard said, reaching for his son, but Ethan jerked away. "It's not okay. The plane is supposed to go. That's what planes do. They go." His voice was rising, approaching that familiar pitch that preceded a full meltdown. Richard felt panic rising in his chest. Malik wasn't here. He was alone with this, just like he'd always been alone with it. All around them, people were starting to stare, and Richard could feel their judgment, their pity, their annoyance. Then Ethan said something that broke Richard's heart. "I want Malik." "Malik understands." "You don't understand, Daddy. You never understand." The words were like physical blows, each one true, each one devastating. Richard dropped to his knees beside his son, not caring who was watching, not caring about his expensive suit on the dirty airport floor. "You're right," he said, his voice breaking. "I don't understand, but I want to. God, Ethan, I want to so badly." Ethan was crying now, rocking back and forth, his hands over his ears, even though there was no loud noise. "The planes are supposed to fly. That's the rule. That's how it works." Richard remembered something Malik had done on the plane. Instead of trying to stop the rocking, he matched it, swaying slightly himself. "Sometimes rules change," he said softly, "like how we made a new rule today. The rule that friends help friends. Ethan's rocking slowed slightly. That's a good rule. Want to make another new rule? Richard asked, still swaying gently. The rule that when planes can't fly, we find something else to do. Like what? Ethan asked suspiciously. Richard thought desperately. What would Malik do? Then it came to him. Like calling our friend. You promised to call Malik tonight. Maybe we could call him now. Ethan's entire demeanor changed. Now? But it's daytime. New rule, Richard said, managing a small smile. Friends can call any time they need each other. He powered on his phone, ignoring the flood of messages and missed calls, and found the number Malik had written down. His hands shook as he dialed, putting it on speaker so Ethan could hear. Hello. It was Malik's voice, sounding tired but warm. Malik, Ethan shouted. The planes won't fly. There's weather. Hey, buddy, Malik said, his voice immediately taking on that calming tone. That must be really frustrating. It's wrong, Ethan insisted. Planes are supposed to fly. You know what? Malik said, sometimes when things don't go the way they're supposed to, it's because something better is supposed to happen. Maybe you're stuck there for a reason. As if on cue, Richard heard a commotion near the lounge entrance. A family had just arrived, and their young son was in clear distress, exhibiting similar behaviors to Ethan's earlier meltdown. The parents looked exhausted, overwhelmed, lost. Ethan noticed too. He watched the other boy for a moment, then looked at his father. He's like me. Yeah, Richard said softly. He is. He's scared, Ethan observed. Then, to Richard's complete shock, Ethan stood up and walked over to the family. Richard scrambled to follow, phone still in hand so Malik could hear what was happening. Ethan approached slowly, the same way Malik had approached him. He didn't try to touch the other boy, didn't speak loudly. Instead, he sat down on the floor nearby and began rolling the toy car Malik had left with him, the one with the broken wheel. The other boy's cries faltered, his attention caught by the repetitive motion. Sometimes planes don't fly, Ethan said to the boy, his voice steady and sure. But that's okay. We can wait. Waiting is just a different kind of going. The boy's parents stared in amazement as their son's panic began to subside, his eyes tracking the little car's crooked path. Is that? Malik's voice came through the phone speaker. Is Ethan helping another kid? Yes, Richard whispered, his throat tight with emotion. He's doing exactly what you did. No, Malik directly. He's doing what Ethan does. He just needed to know it was okay to be himself. Over the next hour, as the storm outside grew worse and the delays extended, something remarkable happened. Ethan became a bridge between the two families. He showed the other boy, whose name was Jamie, how to make patterns with the tapping. He shared the superhero plane story, adding his own details. He was patient when Jamie got frustrated, understanding in a way that came from lived experience. Richard found himself talking to Jamie's parents, sharing not business cards or investment opportunities, but honest conversation about the challenges and joys of raising a neurodivergent child. For the first time, he spoke about Sarah's death, about his failures, about what he'd learned today. Your son is remarkable, Jamie's mother said, watching Ethan teach Jamie the 7-3 pattern. He is, Richard agreed, and meant it fully for perhaps the first time. The storm outside intensified, lightning visible through the large windows. An announcement came through that flights were now canceled until morning. Passengers groaned and complained, but Ethan took it in stride. More time with my new friend, he said simply. Richard's phone rang. It was Malik again, this time on FaceTime. Ethan grabbed the phone eagerly, and Malik's face appeared, Aunt Sheila and Marcus visible in the background. Marcus wants to see the superhero plane drawing, Malik said. Ethan carefully smoothed out the crumpled paper and held it up to the camera. Marcus, a younger boy with bright eyes and a shy smile, clapped his hands in delight. Plane, Marcus said. Superplane. Superplane, Ethan agreed solemnly. As the boys interacted through the screen, Sheila moved into view. Mr. Hale, I wanted to thank you. Malik told me about your offer to help with Diana's treatment. That's incredibly generous. It's what friends do, Richard said, echoing his son's earlier words. Your nephew saved us today, in more ways than one. He has that gift, Sheila said softly. Always has. Even when things are hardest for him, he finds a way to help others. The storm reached its peak then, the lights in the airport flickering. Several children in the lounge started crying, and Ethan looked around with concern. "They're scared," he told Malik through the phone. "What do you think would help them?" Malik asked. Ethan thought for a moment, then stood up on a chair. Richard moved to stop him, then caught himself. Let him be himself, he thought. "Everyone," Ethan announced in his clear, precise voice. "The lights are just playing, like when you turn them on and off really fast. The storm is making them play. It's not scary, it's just playing." A few parents smiled, one even repeating Ethan's explanation to their frightened toddler. The simple reframing, seeing it through Ethan's unique perspective, seemed to help. "That was perfect," Malik said through the phone. "You're helping everyone feel better." "Like you helped me," Ethan said. "No, buddy. We helped each other." As the storm began to pass, Richard noticed something. The entire lounge had changed. Strangers were talking to each other, sharing food, entertaining each other's children. The forced proximity and shared experience had broken down the usual walls. His phone buzzed with a text from his assistant. "Sir, the board is concerned about your absence. The Tokyo deal." Richard deleted the message without reading the rest. For the first time in his professional life, he didn't care about the deal, the board, any of it. "Daddy," Ethan said, returning to sit beside him. "Are you different now?" Richard considered the question seriously. "I think I am. Is that okay?" "Yes," Ethan said simply. "Different is good. Malik taught me that." "Malik taught us both that," Richard agreed. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having washed the air clean. Richard had spent the night in an airport hotel with Ethan, and for the first time in years, they'd actually talked. Not Richard talking at Ethan or about Ethan, but with him. They'd ordered room service and watched planes take off and land. Ethan explaining the different types of aircraft with encyclopedic knowledge Richard hadn't known he possessed. Now, standing at the gate for their rescheduled flight, Richard saw that several other passengers from their original flight were there, including Jamie's family and the businessman who'd offered to help find his brother. "Did you?" Richard asked him quietly. "Find your brother?" The man nodded, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "He's in a facility in Maine. I'm flying there instead of to my meeting. 40 years. 40 years I've lost because I was afraid, ashamed. Your son and that young man showed me what courage really looks like." As they boarded, the gate agent smiled at Ethan. "I heard you were quite the hero yesterday, helping other kids during the storm." Ethan considered this. Not a hero, just a friend. Heroes are different. Friends are same, but different. The flight to Los Angeles was uneventful, but Richard noticed everything had changed. Ethan still covered his ears during announcements, but didn't panic. Richard didn't try to control or fix. He just stayed present, available. When Ethan wanted to tap his patterns, Richard joined in. When he needed space, Richard gave it. Halfway through the flight, Ethan asked, "Can we visit Malik and meet his mommy?" "Absolutely," Richard said, "as soon as she's feeling up to visitors." "We should bring her something," Ethan said seriously. "When people are sick, you bring them something. Mommy likes flowers. Maybe Malik's mommy likes flowers." "We'll ask Malik what she likes," Richard agreed. As they began their descent into LAX, Richard's phone started buzzing with notifications. The video had gone even more viral overnight, picked up by major news outlets. There were interview requests, appearance offers, even a message from a publishing house wanting to turn it into a children's book. But there was one message that stood out from an unknown number. "Mr. Hale, my name is Dr. Jennifer Patterson. I'm an oncologist at MD Anderson. I saw the story about the young man who helped your son. I'd like to offer my services pro bono for his mother's treatment. Sometimes we all need someone to meet us where we are." Richard felt tears prick his eyes. The ripples of kindness were spreading far beyond what any of them could have imagined. The plane touched down smoothly, and as they prepared to disembark, Richard realized people were applauding. At first, he thought it was for the pilots, but then he realized passengers were looking at them, at Ethan. "Why are they clapping?" Ethan asked, confused. "Because you taught them something important," Richard said. "I didn't teach anything. I just was myself." "Exactly," Richard said. "That's what you taught them." As they walked through LAX, Richard was shocked to see news crews waiting. Someone had leaked their arrival time. Cameras turned their way, reporters calling out questions. Richard's first instinct was to shield Ethan, to escape through a VIP exit. But then he felt Ethan's hand in his, steady and calm. "It's okay, Daddy," Ethan said. "They just want to know about Malik." So Richard stopped. For the first time in his career, he didn't have his publicist, his talking points, his carefully crafted image. He just had the truth. "The young man who helped my son," Richard said, his voice carrying clearly, "showed us that humanity isn't about wealth or status or power. It's about connection, about seeing each other not as problems to be solved, but as people to be understood. My son has autism. For years, I tried to fix him, change him, make him fit into my world. But Malik, a 12-year-old boy dealing with his own family crisis, showed me that the answer isn't changing my son. It's changing myself." "Mr. Hale," one reporter called out, "what would you say to other parents of children with autism?" Richard looked down at Ethan, who nodded encouragingly. "I'd say what Malik told me. Meet them where they are, not where you want them to be. And listen, they're always communicating. We just need to learn their language." "What about Malik?" another reporter asked. "Will you stay in touch?" This time, Ethan answered, his voice clear and confident. "He's our friend. Friends are forever, even when they're far away." The cameras loved it. Richard could already see the headlines forming. But he didn't care about the optics anymore. This wasn't about image management. It was real. They finally made it through the terminal to where Richard's driver was waiting. But instead of going straight home to Bel Air, Richard made a different decision. "Take us to the office," he told the driver. Ethan looked confused. "But it's weekend." "I know. I need to do something." The building was mostly empty, just security and a few workaholics. Richard took Ethan up to the executive floor, to the boardroom where just days ago he'd been planning the Tokyo expansion. He sat Ethan in his chair at the head of the table, then pulled up a different chair beside him. "This is where Daddy works," he explained, "where I make decisions about the company." "Big decisions?" Ethan asked, spinning slightly in the chair. "Very big, but I realized something. I've been making all these big decisions about business, but I haven't been making the important decisions about us, about our family." He pulled out his phone and, with Ethan watching, sent an email to the board. "Effective immediately, I'm restructuring my role. I'll remain CEO, but I'll be delegating more operational duties. My son needs me present, not just providing. This is non-negotiable." "What does that mean?" Ethan asked. "It means more time for trains, more time for tapping patterns, more time for us." Ethan smiled, the kind of full, unguarded smile that Richard realized he'd been missing for so long. Richard's phone rang. It was Malik, FaceTime again. Ethan grabbed it eagerly. "Malik, we're in Daddy's big office." "Cool," Malik said. He looked tired but happy. "Guess what? That doctor you told us about? She called. She says she can help Mom. We're flying to Houston next week." "We'll come too," Ethan said immediately, then looked at Richard. "Right, Daddy?" "Absolutely," Richard said without hesitation. "We'll be there." In the background, they could hear Diana's weak voice. "Is that the family you helped, baby?" Malik turned the phone, and for the first time they saw Diana. She was thin, clearly ill, but her eyes were bright with the same kindness Richard had seen in her son. "Thank you," she said simply, "for being kind to my boy, for seeing him. He saved us," Richard said, his voice thick with emotion. "Your son saved us." "He's always been special that way," Diana said. "Even when things are hardest, he finds light." "Like Ethan," Malik added. "He found light yesterday, too. Helped all those scared kids at the airport." Ethan beamed at the praise. "We're same, but different." "That's exactly right," Diana agreed, smiling despite her obvious exhaustion. After they hung up, Richard and Ethan sat in the boardroom, looking out at the city sprawled below. The sun was setting, painting everything golden. "Daddy," Ethan said, "are you happy sad or sad happy?" Richard considered the question. Trust Ethan to understand that emotions could be complex, layered. "Both," he admitted. "Sad about all the time I wasted. Happy about what comes next." "Me too," Ethan said. "Sad Mommy can't see. Happy we found Malik." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Ethan asked, Can we go home now? I want to show Malik my train room on video. Of course, Richard said, standing. But first, one more thing. He led Ethan to his office, to the wall of awards and magazine covers that had always seemed so important. He took down the Fortune cover featuring him alone, replacing it with a printed screenshot from someone's phone. The moment on the plane when Ethan, Malik, and Richard were all connected, all helping each other. Better, Ethan declared. As they left the building, Richard's phone buzzed with more messages. The lawyer from the plane had already filed paperwork for Diana's case. The restaurant owner had reached out to Sheila about a management position. The oncologist had assembled a team for Diana's treatment. The ripples continued spreading. But the message that mattered most was a text from Malik. "Thank you for seeing me too. Friends forever." Richard typed back, "Forever." That evening, they set up a video call as promised. Ethan gave Malik a virtual tour of his train room, explaining each engine in detail. Malik listened with genuine interest, asking questions that made Ethan light up. Marcus joined in, and soon all three boys were making train sounds and laughing. Richard watched from the doorway, marveling at the change. A week ago, Ethan couldn't have imagined sharing his trains, even virtually. Now he was eagerly planning which ones Malik and Marcus could play with when they visited. His assistant texted again about the Tokyo deal, about the board's concerns, about stock prices. Richard deleted them all. For the first time in his life, he understood what really mattered. Later that night, as Richard tucked Ethan into bed, his son asked, "Daddy, do you think Mommy would be proud?" Richard's throat tightened. "I think she would be very proud. Of you especially. Of you too." Ethan said, "You're learning." "Yeah," Richard agreed. "I'm learning." Ethan was quiet for a moment, then said, "Malik taught us something important." "What's that?" "That broken wheels can still roll. Just different." Richard kissed his son's forehead, something he hadn't done in months. "Good night, my perfect boy." "Not perfect," Ethan corrected. "Just Ethan. That's enough." "More than enough," Richard agreed. As he left Ethan's room, Richard noticed the drawing Malik had made was now framed and hanging on the wall next to Ethan's bed. The superhero plane, watching over him. Richard went to his home office and began making calls. Not about business, but about setting up a foundation. The Malik Johnson Foundation for Neurodivergent Youth. He'd fund it initially, but more importantly, he'd be involved, really involved. Malik would help run it when he was older, if he wanted. It would provide support, understanding, and most importantly, connection for families like theirs. His phone lit up with one final message of the day from a number he didn't recognize. "Mr. Hale, you don't know me, but I saw the video. My daughter has autism, and we've been struggling. Seeing your son help others, seeing you learn and grow, it gives us hope. Thank you for being vulnerable in public. It matters." Richard set down his phone and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, families were struggling with the same challenges. But maybe, just maybe, what happened on that plane could help them too. The toy car with the broken wheel sat on his desk, a reminder that sometimes the most profound journeys happen when things don't go as planned. When a millionaire's autistic son screams mid-flight, and a poor black boy does the unthinkable, he sees him, understands him, and shows everyone watching that our differences aren't weaknesses to be fixed, but strengths to be celebrated. The story that had begun with chaos and embarrassment had become something else entirely, a testament to the power of human connection, the wisdom of children, and the transformative nature of simply meeting someone where they are. Richard picked up his phone one more time, opening the Notes app. He began writing. Lessons from Malik and Ethan. Broken things can still work, just differently. Friends don't stop being friends when they're apart. Everyone needs someone to meet them where they are. Different is not less. Sometimes the smallest gestures create the biggest changes. Children often understand what adults have forgotten. Pride is the enemy of connection. Vulnerability is not weakness. True wealth is measured in relationships. It's never too late to learn. As he finished writing, he heard Ethan's voice from his room, talking to himself or perhaps to the superhero plane on the wall. Tomorrow we'll call Malik again. And the next day. And the next day. Because that's what friends do. Richard smiled, a real smile, the kind Sarah would have recognized. For the first time since her death, he felt her presence not as an absence, but as a gentle approval. She'd always known Ethan was perfect as he was. It had just taken a 12-year-old boy with a broken toy car to teach Richard the same truth. The story ends not with Richard Hale, Millionaire CEO, but with Richard Hale, father, sitting in his son's doorway, watching him sleep peacefully, the drawing of a superhero plane standing guard, and the promise of tomorrow's video call with the boy who changed everything. In the end, Malik hadn't just calmed a meltdown on a plane. He'd shifted the trajectory of multiple lives, creating a ripple effect of kindness that would spread far beyond any of them could imagine. All because he did something that shouldn't be unthinkable at all. He saw a child in distress and chose compassion over comfort, connection over judgment. The broken toy car would be kept forever. A reminder that sometimes the most precious gifts come from those who have the least to give, and that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the bridges we build between each other's worlds. What would happen if we stopped trying to fix what we don't understand and started learning the language of those who speak differently than us? If this story touched your heart, please like and subscribe for more powerful stories that remind us what truly matters in our shared humanity.